Okay, go ahead.
Very good morning and welcome to the additional skill acquisition program webinar on the topic the post-COVID era and its different implications. As you might know, COVID-19 pandemic is entering the history books as one of the most important global events after World War II. Even the world has started discussing about times about post-COVID era and the way world is going to evolve after that period. And as far as Kerala is concerned, we have also started seeing unprecedented scale return migration of people spread across the world, and the different forums are discussing this in detail. And today, to discuss this and more, we have a very eminent international expert, Sri T.P. Srinivasan IFS, who is an expert in foreign affairs and who was India's ambassador to several countries and a person who has held very high offices. Sri T.P. Srinivasan IFS had held the office of permanent representative of India in the UN. He was also the governor for India in the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, in Vienna. Apart from holding high offices, very high diplomatic offices in Washington, Kenya, Moscow, Fiji, and New York, representing India in those countries, a person with more than 20 years of experience in multilateral diplomacy, and a person who has represented India in very important international conferences of the United Nations, Commonwealth, and also the non-aligned movement. So we have a very eminent person today to speak about this very important topic with all respect and with great happiness. Let me invite you, sir, to this discussion. Srinivasan, sir, please.
Thank you very much. Very good to see you this morning, and I'm so glad that you have asked me to participate in this discussion. Well, it's almost an impossible task to say what the world would be in 2021 and beyond. Because first of all, we are still in the middle of the crisis. We have no idea where this pandemic will end and what will be the demographic composition of the world. How many people will die, what kind of people, what ages, what groups, what races. All these are questions which are still not resolved. Some people even feel that the humanity will have to live with the virus for a long time to come. Today I read an article by Ashley Tellis of the Carnegie Foundation, who said that the impact of coronavirus on the American economy will last for 40 years. These are the kinds of predictions. So in that context, how do I say what the world would be like after the coronavirus leaves us, if at all it leaves us? So that is the problem. But there are two ways of thinking and two schools of thought. The first is led by no less a person than Henry Kissinger, who says that we will not be able to recognize the world of 2021 being. There will be so many changes geopolitically, health-wise, education-wise. There will be so many changes that you will hardly remember what the world was like in 2019. There is another school of thought done by another strategic thinker, is that this will not change the world in a dramatic manner, but it will accelerate the changes which are already taking place. I tend to agree with that view because if we look at the past history, you will find that even the most cataclysmic of events that we have witnessed leave an impact, but that impact may not be so different from the previous occasion. Let us think about 9/11. We thought that 9/11 would change the world, the way the world thinks. Nuclear power has become useless. People who have no arms in their hands can make the most powerful country in the world shudder. And therefore, everything will change. That was the That was the prophecy. But when you look back at the last few years, you will find that yes, changes have taken place, but we have more or less settled down to the pattern of life as before. And the only remaining impact that we see everyday life is when you go to the airport. Because the security checks, we don't remember that there was an occasion when there was no such security checks. You could walk into the plane. But now we have accepted it. It has become part of the 9/11 transformation of the world. For other things, we still have nuclear weapons, even though nuclear weapons are considered useless, but they still have that. So we went back to the old ways with some changes. So if you look at the world today, you can already see certain trends. And these trends would have taken longer if there was no pandemic. But as a result of the pandemic and as a result of the changes that have taken place, now these trends will be accelerated. What is the first trend? The first trend started by President Trump is that there is no place for globalization or multilateralism. Every country must be sovereign and one country must work for itself, and America will work for itself, and America first, and what the best the world can do is to simply accept what they do. And therefore, a striking blow was given to the international system as we understood it and the way it evolved after the Second World War. The United States itself was the architect of that new world. But the United States is now determined to destroy that and build up a world where the United States acts on its own to make America first. The second trend we know is that the increasing competition between the United States and China. This has taken various shapes. Different political parties in the United States have different assessments about China. China itself is most unpredictable, except that China is determined to become the leader of the world by hook or by crook. So the conflict is not with anybody else. China had already fought a war against us in 1962, which they clearly won, and therefore they do not believe that India is a rival to them. In fact, they believe that they've already taken over Asia. And their next effort is to somehow overtake the United States militarily, economically, and in various other ways. And that is the effort that they're doing. Of course, the United States was not willing to move away from their, what we call the hegemonistic position. Hegemony in the good sense, that is, they have a prominent role in the world for hundreds of years. So that conflict has been becoming more and more acute. And the trade war, which we saw recently, had an impact on it. At the same time, they are cooperating in many ways. Thousands and thousands of Chinese students are in the United States. They have a big trade relationship. American companies are working in China. So it's a conflict and a love-hate relationship with China. And it was estimated that by 2035 or so, China would overtake the United States in many ways. But now it appears that this will happen probably faster, because the United States has become very vulnerable and very weak. They have nobody to blame except the President of the United States, who has reacted very callously to this whole situation. In January, he should have started working on it, and he simply dismissed it as a flu. And then he has been confusing everybody. Every day, his press conference were a horror to the world, because we couldn't imagine that a country could be so rudderless and leaderless. So the fight for leadership of the world is very much there, and the actors are United States and China. We must remember that United States, in spite of this crisis and in spite of the loss in the economic power, it is still the prominent power in the world. because they hold the world's wealth in their hands. And it is still a dollar-based economy. And they have the research and development of all the scientific achievements of the world for which they are paid a royalty, whoever produces this machinery and equipment. So United States cannot be dismissed like that. But at the same time, they'll put up a real fight, but it depends on one particular factor. Is China a hero or a villain in this game? We suspect that China created the virus. That we don't know yet. But one thing is certain, that they kept a lot of secrets. In December or even November, they could have warned the world that this was coming and people could have taken joint action. But first they denied that anything had happened. Then they did not give the facts to the world. And therefore, much of the responsibility for creating this pandemic rests on China. China is, of course, denying that. And on the other hand, they're also now saying that we are back to normal, to work as usual, as business as usual. We will support the world. We will assist them. We'll send them medical equipment, etc., etc. And so they are making a very brave effort to become the hero of the story rather than the villain as it is seen. Then you turn to the next most powerful grouping in the world is European Union. European Union is in shambles. It had always been shambles since the beginning of Brexit. Now we don't even know what shape the Brexit will take, but that has basically undermined the unity of the European Union. And as a result of that, we found that during the pandemic, each European country was on its own. There was no European Union united action. And that is the reason why there is so much of damage in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Germany, etc., etc. So European Union stands no chance to unify itself to provide leadership to the world. Then we have Russia. Russia's interest at the moment is to somehow capture the leadership of the European Union. They are staying close to China. They are not encouraging too much of multilateral effort to fight the pandemic. They are claiming that they have not been affected very badly, but they are staying close to China, watching the situation, and with an eye to finally be able to take up the leadership of the world, which Putin is very much interested in. Then we have to look around the world and look at India, Japan, Australia, Korea, some of these, emerging countries, Brazil. How about these? Will they be able to provide some kind of leadership? And here I find a ray of opportunity, a window of opportunity for India. First and foremost, we have survived or at least managed the crisis fairly well, though we do not know where we are going. We have other problems coming up. But generally, the impression that India has managed it well compared to other equivalent states, but our country is so huge, our situation is different in different states, so we still don't know what the situation will be. But as of now, we have a fairly good image, and particularly for Kerala, even a better image. That is one. Secondly, we have not expressed any interest in any geopolitical leadership. We are not criticizing anyone. We are not criticized even China. We are not criticized the United States. We are trying to help them out in whatever way we can. And more than 100 countries have sought help from us. The second strong point we have is we are multilateral in our philosophy. We believe in international cooperation. The UN for us is not something from which we want advantages. We want the UN to get the advantages of our experience. So we try to revive SAARC. We are instrumental in holding the G20 meeting. We suggested the G7 meeting. We encouraged the United Nations to take some action. And therefore, if multilateral diplomacy emerges, there is no other country which can fill the bill of encouraging multilateral diplomacy. Whether it will be a new UN or the old UN with changes, there will be changes, and there India will have an opportunity. And similarly, Japan, Australia. So Japan, Australia, and India, as you know, is a grouping in Indian Ocean. And that may be a possibility for us. So in other words, what we are thinking, we are hoping is that there will be a multipolar world after this. Nobody is too big or nobody is too rich or nobody is too important. And therefore, there will be a better distribution of power in this world, particularly because the United States has suffered very much as a result of the way it was handled. So this is roughly the situation that I see after the pandemic subsides. Every country will try to do its best to survive and to flourish, but we are yet to wait and see how each one performs and what the world will be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. In 15 minutes, you have painted the global scenario in a beautiful way. It was a wonderful painting that you have done in this 15 minutes. And you have spoken about the divided world and the reversal of the globalization trends, where countries are becoming more, trying to become more sovereign. They are closing doors. And also the waiting approach that is being taken by different countries. The situation in the European Union. Thank you so much for all these your ideas about all these things. My question would be: so we saw that India. You also spoke about the opportunity waiting for India. Maybe it is due to the acceptance that India has at the global stage. We saw that when Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister of the country, India had a similar opportunity, and India had taken that opportunity in terms of that non-aligned movement and all. Do you see such an opportunity and India going for such an opportunity? You mentioned about a new international body even coming up. So do you foresee such a thing?
Your voice is breaking, so I can't get the question correctly. Your voice is breaking.
Sir, can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, I can hear you, but off and on it goes.
Sir, do you think that there is a relevance for India, the way India had seized the opportunity during the reign of Rajiv Gandhi, just like the non-aligned movement came up? Do you find any such an opportunity for India to push in for some new international bodies?
Well, non-aligned movement, Mr. Modi has actually kept out of it all this time. In fact, for the first time, he attended a non-aligned virtual conference day before yesterday, because he had realized or understood that our problems are not the problems of the small developing countries. We are in the big game. We have to deal with the big players. That is his attitude. But after what happened, after Mr. Trump came to power, he started rediscovering the non-aligned, as it were. He went to some of the smaller countries. He spoke in Singapore about importance of smaller countries. And finally, he also attended a meeting the other day. So there is likelihood of a revival of the non-aligned movement. But it is not very purposeful because it does not have the kind of agenda that it had in the past. So it will be basically an economic grouping that rather than a political group. But I would say more than the non-aligned movement, to be our own strength and our own attraction is going to give us importance. Unfortunately, of course, our economic situation was bad even before the COVID-19 came. And we were struggling to recover from it when this happened. And that is a disadvantage because nobody understands strength unless you have power. You need to have military power, you need to have economic power, you must have the soft power. We have all this, but our economic situation is still difficult, and that is going to be our handicap.
Sir, you also mentioned about the ongoing conflict between the US and China. And from a defense strategic perspective, would you find an escalation of this crisis and affecting the entire world in a different way?
True. Our conflict with China is permanent because after 1962, China has not resolved any problem with India. starting with the border. And every year we are adding newer and new problems till up to Doklam. There have been so many areas in which China has tried to teach India a lesson, as they always say. And what is this lesson? The lesson is that India cannot lead Asia or South Asia. And they are the ones who are going to take care of this. And this is a constant problem. So China will be our adversary all through. But we don't have the strength or the power to take on China, either militarily or diplomatically, or through assistance to all the countries to whom they are dishing out money in the name of the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's very difficult to compete in those areas. But the fact that we have a democracy, a functioning democracy, which is doing well, which is capable of administering itself well, and these advantages we have. But there cannot be a direct confrontation between India and China. And that is why we need to have powerful friends. And that is why we have in Indian Ocean, there's something called the quadrilateral, United States, India, Japan, and Australia. So these things are possible. But at the same time, now that the United States is down, China will become more aggressive and create issues which would bring us maybe in direct conflict with China. And that is something that we have to see. But we are doing well. We are very patient with them. We even supplied equipment to them. We accepted equipment which turned out to be not good quality. All that we have handled very diplomatically. And therefore, we are not irritating either China, US, or Russia. And that is a very wise policy that we have adopted. And that will sure bring us dividends.
So my question was on the US-China conflict that is emerging, and also
US-China conflict.
Yes.
Yes, that I outlined, because yes, US-China conflict can be serious. That's particularly when there is President Trump, because you can never depend on him. You cannot predict, and there was possible that anything may happen. But he has shown us in the last 4 years that he is not a warmonger. He uses war as a threat, but last minute he withdraws, as in the state of Korea, as in the case of Iran, as in the case of Iraq. Everywhere, now he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He doesn't want a war prize. And therefore, he may not provoke a war, but the conflict with China will be more economic, and a trade war kind of situation will evolve. And the problem is, in trade wars, nobody wins. Everybody is a loser. And that we have already seen. So we have to see what strategy they will adopt. But they are both dependent on each other more than any other country with anybody else. So both have to play a game in which they can support each other and at the same time win the race. That is what's going to happen.
Sir, earlier you spoke about the opportunity that is waiting for India. Yes. Also, before COVID, we were facing an economic slowdown. And there were projections of a very low GDP growth in the next 2 years. So with COVID impacting the country in a big way, how would you see that particular situation where India has to beat both its global commitments as well as domestic commitments?
Yes, that will be a big impact on our economy, because the effort to rebuilding the nation, first of all, of course, saving lives. We are now confronted with these two choices, whether it is the head or the heart. If you think of the heart, you are thinking of saving lives. If you think about the head, you are wanting to save livelihoods. So that is what the Prime Minister emphasized last time. We need to have both. So this lockdown is a sentimental thing, that is, try to keep everybody home so that they don't catch the disease. But the impact on the economy is so much that if we lock down ourselves for longer, then there will be nothing to eat. People may not die of the virus, but they may die of poverty or starvation. Can we face that? And therefore, we have to have a mix of both. So that is why we are talking about opening up industries, starting the construction process, start even the lottery, because these are all things which are the engineers of our economy. But the big blow is the sudden stoppage of remittances from abroad. The kind of money that we used to get will suddenly stop, at least to half. and that we have to recover. Then the rebuilding is important. So it depends on the way in which the economy is made to support itself. Mr. Raghuram Rajan said the other day that we need something like 36,000 crores to deal with the COVID-19. But he immediately said, but the GDP is so much that 36,000 crores will not make a big difference. I mean, I was surprised to hear that. But anyway, there must be a way like that to support the economy. And if we can pick up more and more export, for example, and also jump into the supply chain, which the Chinese has been maintaining, we may be able to capture some of that. And all these, there are hopes, but this is going to be a very tough situation. And we should be prepared for a long haul in the repair of the nation's economy.
So during your presentation also, you spoke about the changing demographics. The world is changing, and we don't know what kind of world will be left behind once the COVID.
So, sir, the important thing that we see now is it is the developed countries which have been affected most. And this is unusual. Normally, such problems ravage the developing countries. So, are we going to have more poor people in the world than rich people? That's one question. Then there are some, because I don't want to elaborate it, but there are some speculation about races. What kind of color, what kind of people will survive this? And that is also important. Then the population itself. The population, after all, is a strength. It is not a weakness. So if a country loses 1 million people, then that affects that country very seriously. So this is what I meant by the demographic changes. And once this is over, the pandemic is over, then only we'll be able to make a clear assessment of the damage and see how the new world emerges. But as I said, it may not be as dramatic as we think. We may be able to rectify those issues. But education is a big, big problem. Because if for 1 year, the education system in the whole world collapses. The important thing that we need to do in this field of education is many people are already doing it, to change over to online education. Of course, that is not the best. We believe in Guru-Shishya relationship, and the teachers are very important, and classroom experience is unbeatable, etc., etc. But that is the best. But we need to look for a second best if the first best is not easily available. And therefore, we need to shift to massive open line courses and online programs and so on, which we are still reluctant. Like the old days when in Kerala we said we don't want computers. So like that, Kerala people are saying we don't want online education. And that's a very short-sighted approach. Okay, if it comes back to normal, we can introduce back all our teachers, we can bring back, etc., etc. But we don't know. And therefore, at least for a year, we have to have a plan. And the UGC has recommended a very robust plan for a shift to online education, which is being resisted in Kerala, I notice. And so, but we have no choice. We can't do the best, so we have to do with the second best.
Maybe we'll settle down to a better model, combining both in terms of blended learning also.
Yes, that's possible. Percentages. But then if classrooms cannot be held, where do we go for the other half? That's the problem. So if we are able to, keep social distancing, and it will not be the same thing. In a class, children sitting in different corners of a room and so on are not going to be happy situations. So depending on that, suppose everybody gets back to normal by September, well, we can forget about it. But online education has one more advantage, which is that so online education, which will give our education system new information and knowledge, which our teachers don't have. Teachers were graduated many years earlier, and they have the experience, they have the knowledge, they have a way with teaching, etc. But they stop at one point. After that, they cannot be educated any further. The old joke about somebody asking Yarada in the T.S. Eliot, who is this T.S. Eliot? Because he had not heard of anybody after Tennyson, English professors. So similarly, there is a gap between what is presently in science and what we teach as science in our university. So even if things get back to normal, it will be better for us, it will be good for us to use the resources available out in the internet. Of course, there is a huge amount of information and knowledge, but how you use it and how selectively use it is the real test.
So we have got a very important question. It's like someone has asked as to almost all countries are on a downward economic spiral, and countries are all imagining ways by which they can come out of the situation. So, what would be the best strategy for economic revival as far as you see it?
I didn't hear the last part. Economic revival?
So this revival
Economic
of
revival and what? Sorry?
Revival of economies,
Yes.
countries have to develop new strategies. So according to you, for a country like India, which is already facing some economic crisis, what would be the best strategy? Whether it will be like going back to the primary sectors of agriculture and all, coming back again, or is it some other strategy?
Well, we are hearing every day about new incentives, new allocations, and the second allocation is expected. I'm not an economist, so I cannot really spell out what we can do. But as you mentioned, agriculture is an important, in fact, the most important aspect of India's development. And agriculture has been neglected in the past because of our fancy for industrialization, 3G and Make in India and all kinds of things. And therefore, the farmers have suffered, agriculture has suffered, production has decreased. And this is one area to which we have to give great attention, and that I think the Prime Minister is doing. But at the same time, we also have to develop our technology, develop our industrial base, develop our consumer industry. All that is necessary because there will be so much demand for it, even in the developed countries now, because the state of affairs that you find in Europe. If you can quickly move in before the Chinese do, we might be able to establish a good foothold. But I do not know enough to talk about the specific economic measures.
Yeah. Sir, in the beginning, you made a very powerful statement like you foresee that the change that had already started would only be accelerated. So, especially, we were discussing about the Industry 4.0 and all, the future of jobs. So, this is going to be accelerating that change. Is that the point, sir?
Yes, because every economy is suffering. India had a growth rate of 10 to 11% during Mr. Narasimha Rao's days, we remember. And since then, we have been going down. We are not going up any further. So, global situation changes. And now we are talking about 2% growth rate as against 11 or 5 or 6, which had settled down and so on. So, but we survived the 2008 crisis fairly well because we are not affected by it. In fact, Dr. Manmohan Singh gave the recipe for rectifying it. He was highly respected. Barack Obama kept saying that he is my economic guru and all that. So India had certain advantages. But we don't know whether we have that advantage now. But it has to be a collective effort. We have the BRICS Bank, which the Chinese are controlling. Whether we'll be able to make use of that. Will the World Bank and the IMF support developing countries like India? Because we're supposed to have done well, and therefore they go for poorer or least developed countries. So all these are question marks. And everything depends on the way in which these are distributed. And the multilateral forum alone, WTO, has virtually collapsed. So what is it? What is the alternative we are going to get for that? The Chinese are trying to get their own currency accepted as the global currency. They already declared it, it seems. But that will also take a long time. After all, the money that the Chinese are holding are in dollars. Where will they go and get their money if there is no US Treasury? So all these are questions for which there are no answers. We will have to work our way up from, say, 1.5% to at least a decent growth rate of 5% before, say, in the next couple of years.
So you also spoke about the new behaviors that is going to emerge once we are out of COVID, and you made a comparison between the 9 by 11 that incident, how it changed the world, and going with that line, this will be impacting almost all spheres, not only the security and all. So, how do you envisage the change in global education? We have many students who are having their higher education research in EU and US, and definitely there is going to be some change in the mindsets, both in the terms of the students as well as countries. So, do you think any drastic change in that particular area?
Well, you know my experience, if that is any lesson to learn. So, I was a victim of educational reform because we have an old mindset. We have something like a 19th century mindset, and we have a 20th century syllabus, and we are teaching our students for the 21st century. How can this mix? We have to move out. We have to move out of our mindset. We have to move out of our syllabus. We have to move out of the system of learning, system of teaching, system of testing, system of selecting people for jobs, identifying at the early age what kind of graduates we want. I had made so many proposals, and none of them was implemented. Private universities, what is the harm? What will the private university do? All India, there are private universities. But we are fighting private universities as though it is the pandemic. We are fighting the wrong pandemic. Similarly, foreign universities, we should have nothing to do with it. I never said foreign university was brought here. I said, let us collaborate with foreign universities. So with this kind of a mindset, I do not see any possibility of our moving rapidly towards a more modern education system. And if we don't do that, we will be creating graduates. We will not be able to use what is called the demographic dividend, because India is going to be the youngest country in the world, and we will be asked to provide the brilliance, the brain of the world as it used to be in the past. But if we don't know artificial intelligence, if we don't know about drones, if we don't know robotics, how are we going to provide employment to our people? The construction age is over. The 3D printing is going to take over. And so the modern technology the world will lose so many millions of jobs. But more than that, so many other millions of jobs will be created. And unless we educate our youngsters to handle those machines and that technology, I do not think we'll be able to use our demographic dividend.
My question was a bit towards the international higher education scenario. We have many students studying in Europe and US, and now these students are either about to come back to a country, they are either held up there. So now this COVID has really shaken the mindsets of the students as well as their parents. So do you think a significant impact on their decisions post-COVID in continuing their higher education in the same manner?
Well, see, now our people had the option of leaving Kerala, leaving India for higher education. And that is going to stop, at least temporarily. I don't know how many thousands of students are in the United States who are wanting to come back. Okay, they'll try to hold on there for a while. But if once Mr. Trump puts his foot down and says, you must take away all your students, then where will they go? And what kind of education will they get if they come to India? Can they go to Europe? Can they go to China? As you know, our students go anywhere. Ukraine, there was a war. Then we realized all the Indians are studying in Ukraine. If there is a crisis somewhere else, you will find that students are there. We did not know such students existed. So this kind of a window internationally that we have may suffer. And therefore, people with resources or people who are willing to take bank loans to go and study in better universities in India or abroad will suffer on account of the pandemic. And therefore, all the more reason why we must raise the level of our own education.
Sir, now the whole world is talking about the Kerala model in public health. Now we have, sir, the whole world is talking about the Kerala model of COVID management and the public health
on the coronavirus. Is it?
Yes, sir. The world
Generally.
is talking about the way Kerala is managing the COVID and the way the public health systems are responding. So this is good. This is giving a. Sir, can you hear me, sir?
Are you talking about the coronavirus situation alone or generally development?
No, I'm only talking about the coronavirus management.
Yes, excellent. Yes. Because that has been widely recognized. There are no two opinions about it. And the care that the government is taking and the individual involvement of the chief minister and the health minister and others is remarkable. There is no question about it. Nobody is challenging that. But whether it is all because of what has happened in these last few months, or is it because of the system we have built up over the last 30 or 40 years, is in question. Washington Post, for example, said this is all because 30 years there are communist government in Kerala. It's not true. Every 5 years we had a new government. But all these governments followed the path of looking after education and health, which is known as the Kerala model of development. So there is a dispute, as you know, whether it should be Kerala model with low economic growth but high investment in social development, or the Gujarat model where you have a high growth in industries and so on, and then that's slowly coming into the social sectors. So there are two opinions, and there are two famous Indian economists who they live abroad, Jagdish Bhagawati and the other one. So both Nobel Prize winner. So they have different thinking. But definitely it is acknowledged that Kerala has, at least as far as health is concerned and primary education is concerned, Kerala has done very well. And we are lucky and we must hold on to it, because whenever anybody praises Kerala, I thank them and I immediately say, here, my fingers are crossed. Because you never know when the situation will change. I hope it doesn't. After all, we have worked very hard on it, and I hope it will be sustained. But we have not reached a stage, as the Chief Minister repeatedly saying that we have overcome. We have not overcome that yet. We had good luck, we had good leaders, we had a good administration, but beyond that, we cannot say.
Sir, and also we are going to see a large influx of NRKs into the state. There is all probability that at least half of them might not return, given the kind of uncertain situations across the globe. So, what kind of impact is this going to bring on the state?
Well, this is the biggest crisis we are facing today. You are right. Everybody is not going to come. But at the moment, the psychology is such that if you say, please register to go to India, everybody will register. There's no question about it. Just to make sure that you have a place in this list somewhere, and if necessary, will go. But when you actually tell them that you are registered, please take this flight, then they say, oh, my turn has come. I didn't realize it will come so soon. This has actually happened, apparently. So people are still looking for opportunities, those who have good jobs, even if they have to take a lower salary. Like my son in Dubai, he has taken a 25% cut in his salary. But he is continuing because he has some kind of stability in his workplace. So he's not anxious to come away to India. There must be several others like that. And so my feeling is that when actually these things take place, when people start coming and also see the kind of situation they may have to face back home with the quarantines and difficulties and so on, many people will change their mind. So I do not expect that all of them will come. All of them should not come, in a sense, because these are countries which have helped them, and they are needed in those countries even now, like health workers, for example. How would UAE let off all the health workers to come away? They will give them incentives to stay back. And if they restart the construction, where will they get workers to do that? So we have to work out a long-term project with the countries concerned in consultation with them, and then bring those people who are absolutely necessary for them to come back. And the government has already spelled out the priority. Those who are sick, or those who have other illnesses, those who have no employment, those who have no visa. These are people who have to come anyway, regardless. And therefore, bring them and slowly absorb them into the society and make it a very gradual process rather than hurry up saying, oh, floods are coming, water is coming, therefore we must bring them. I think it should be a little more thoughtful kind of a gradual process and not act on the basis of some panic.
So, do you think that the people who are going to return and settle here are going to invest in the state in the future so the economy has brighter days ahead as far as the state is concerned?
You mean they will seek jobs abroad?
No, sir. Do you envisage a better, more investments from the NRKs once they come and settle down here? Will they not feel that it is better to invest in the state rather than outside where risks are higher?
No, I mean, I didn't clearly listen to your question, couldn't understand
Sir,
it. But what you're asking is those who come back, whether they will want to go again for education. Is that what you're asking?
No, sir. Those who are coming back and those who will be settling uh, uh, here permanently, will they not invest in the state? Because now the state will be much safer than any other place. Thinking about the epidemics, recurring epidemics, and other situations.
No, you mean to say people will feel more comfortable living in India rather than going elsewhere. Is that
living and investing in the country?
Yes, they will do that. But investment is not sentimental. We must remember. Investment comes only when they have profit. And that is, whether we like it or not, that is capitalism. So investment will depend on the kind of circumstances you offer them here compared to what they can get elsewhere. You may know that in many countries, India invests more than those countries investing in us. It is not publicized, but it is true. Many huge investors of India are spending money and establishing huge steel industries in Europe and the United States and so on. So they will go where they can make the money. This pandemic or this kind of issues are not permanent, they know. And therefore, they will pursue that. But if we give them competing interests, if we give them opportunities here, then they will invest here. There is no question about it. Patriotism is only part of it. But main consideration will be profitability. And that is why I will not be surprised if some of them want to invest abroad, even in China, rather than here. That may happen. But if you give them the opportunity, I'm sure they will be able to do that and invest in India.
So there is also an interesting question about coronavirus being a bioweapon. What is your take on that, sir?
Being a what?
Bioweapon.
Sorry?
Bioweapon.
I didn't hear what you said.
Sir, coronavirus being a bioweapon.
Bioweapon?
Biological
Okay.
weapon, yes.
All right. Well, that is an accusation that everybody is making, particularly the United States is making against China. Because Wuhan has many laboratories, dubious laboratories, which may not be doing all the right things in the world. Because after all, they have global ambitions. And even though biological weapons are totally prohibited by the United Nations, and China, India, all of us are part of that convention, we believe that people will be engaging it for use at a time when they have no other option. And therefore, when they develop a weapon like that, they normally develop a vaccine also together with it so that they can save their own people. So before they use a biological weapon, they will give the vaccine to their own people so that they don't die in the process. So there is a suspicion that this has actually happened in China. Whether it was actually let off in order to counter the trade war or it accidentally escaped from the laboratory, we don't know. The Americans are asking repeatedly for inspection of these laboratories. And there were several Americans who were also working in these laboratories. A couple of them were arrested in Boston. For the sake of money, they were doing this in China. So anything is possible in this world. Human ingenuity is such that, wherever there is advantage, they will go anyway, the evil way or good way or whatever. So it is not beyond comprehension that this may have happened. But the Chinese are swearing that this did not happen. It came from the wet markets of Wuhan. It may have come from some animal, from bats to human beings. These are all possible because nobody knows the right answer. But that is really the challenge for China. Unless they prove that they are innocent, China cannot ever expect to become a global leader or a respected country.
Sir, what do you think will be the fate of poor countries, especially African countries, which do not have better socioeconomic systems?
Sorry, again, countries which do not have what?
Do not have
Countries which do not have
stronger economies, and countries that are struggling to survive in the present geopolitical situation. How do you
mean the poor countries who are not able to recover? That's what you mean?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That is why you need the international effort. That's why I have been campaigning for the UN to set up a new force. I even gave them a name, Red Berets, because now we have Blue Berets, the Secretary General has. That is armies deployed from various countries and sent for peacekeeping. But peacekeeping does not mean only stopping war. It is also rebuilding of nations. In fact, in Somalia and other places, these blue berets themselves had engaged in nation building. Indian soldiers were, distributing rice in Somalia. I have seen it myself. So this is a part of it. So what I suggested to the UN, of course, nobody took it up because UN is completely divided, that we set up a force, a humanitarian force, in order to deal with these urgent problems in developing countries. Of course, the question is who will pay the money? Will they not object to a force going in to help them? All these are questions merely to digress from the main issue. But an organized force, international force, will be very important and very necessary in that kind of situation where if this spreads in developing countries which are not capable of handling themselves, who are they going to help? And therefore, such a well-equipped, let's not say call a force, because then immediately they think that this is army. But using disciplined forces from different countries under the command of the Secretary General for quick deployment in problem areas is what we need. But of course, it has no takers. I seem to be the only one wanting it.
In your initial presentation, you mentioned about the careless attitude which was taken by the US administration initially, considering this as a fluke. So an interesting question has come up. Do you think that the situation would have been different if there was a different leader in US?
I mean, if there was a different leader in the United States?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you're asking? If there was a different leader in the United States?
Yes, sir.
Of course, it would have made a big difference, huge difference, because President Trump is the most unpredictable person, and he handled this crisis in the most unpredictable manner. In January, proposals were made to him to restrict travel, to allow to have a partial lockdown. This is going to be a serious issue. He said it is just a flu. And he overruled all his health experts, saying that this will just disappear like magic tomorrow or day after tomorrow, etc., etc. And then he became desperate. He wanted chloroquine to be given to everybody, though the medical experts did not agree. He was willing to fight a war against India to get chloroquine from us. And such a ridiculous thing. And finally, he said, let us inject Lysol into everybody. I mean, which president of the world in the world will make such suggestions? And all this made it worse and worse. And now he's saying, let us remove all restrictions. People will die, but doesn't matter. The nation will survive. So this kind of thing does not give anybody any confidence. And that's what I'm saying that I've just written an article saying this will be Trump versus Trump, the next election. Not Trump versus Biden. Biden doesn't matter. do you want a leader like this to lead the country for another 4 years? And that is the question which is being faced by the Americans. But there are many Americans who love him, who are interested in economic growth, who are interested in white domination, not interested in world leadership. Such a kind of people are there in large numbers who will be supporting him perhaps. But the minimum poetic justice that must take place is that he must be told that this kind of administration will not work and there should be some justice in that. But we don't know what the results will be.
Sir, there's a related question.
Only way to look at it.
Yes.
Certainly. And nobody is saying that President Trump has done well.
Yes, sir. Sir, the US withdrawal from international funding, given especially to the world bodies, does it indicate some greater dimension? Because US was projecting itself as the champion of world peace and all. So this is actually a contradiction. What is your take on that?
Well, US has was never reluctant to withdraw funding from international agencies. This is not the first time it has happened. They have stopped funding for the main UN itself for several years. And they have to pay, at that time they had to pay 25% of the UN budget. And they didn't pay even 10%. They said, you are misbehaving. You are not looking after this country. You are not allowing free press. You are not allowing this. So he put so many conditionalities that he withheld money from the UN for many years. That is old Father Bush and later President Bush and so on. So it's only later that they wanted to pay only 22%. That also the world agreed. And we had come back to some kind of normalcy about American payment. They are the biggest donor, and without that, the UN cannot survive. So, but at the same time, they have withdrawn from other agencies. UNIDO, the Industrial Development Organization. I was dealing with it in Vienna. What harm can a small organization with $80 million budget harm the United States? They said no. If all these industries are developed by the United Nations, that will be a competition against us. The whole UNIDO will be smaller than the smallest corporate body in the US. But they withdrew. UNESCO, they withdrew saying that there is no freedom here. This is being misused by the Director General. So this kind of inverted justice US has practiced. So in fact, somebody asked at this rate, Cinderella's mother, the stepmother might be a heroine. Because if you hold back things, if you can reform somebody, then what else was Cinderella's stepmother doing? But that is not the way to approach things. You have to encourage people. You have to incentivize them rather than withdraw this. But this is a part of the American psyche and attitude. But they'll quickly put it back. Once they find that this Director General is shifted out because they feel that they suspect that he is a Chinese agent. And I am sure many people will be working on removing him. And once he is removed, the Americans will come back.
So we are coming to the close of the session. It's already going to be 11. But we'll take one last question. This question is like this. You had already mentioned in your presentation that earlier itself China was emerging as the world leader, and there was a date also given to that 2035. And you said this will be fastened, maybe. But do you see China as emerging as a superpower in the post-COVID world, or do you see a new coalition taking the center stage?
No, I think the leadership will not change. I have a feeling that the US will emerge from all this with a new president or a reformed old president. And they still have an upper hand, as I said, research and development, their economic situation in the world, the amount of military power they have. All that cannot be wished away. So they may catch up with them in terms of economic development because it's already projected for 2035. Some people say it will be 2050, whatever. And some people think that the United States already started diminishing. But this, a book about a post-American world was already written by by Fareed Zakaria some years ago. But the United States is still around. And therefore, we don't know whether they'll allow Chinese to go forward, particularly because Chinese have this big handicap of being responsible for this COVID. So there has to be a judgment on that. Until then, I don't think there will be any change of leadership. But a collective leadership will emerge, and I'm hoping that India will also be part of it because of our own record and our own attitude to the United Nations. We don't want anything from the UN. What we are trying to do is to develop the UN for the sake of the common good of the people. And that is known all around the world. And therefore, we may also be part of this restructured multilateral organization and the multilateral arrangement. But the nationalism will still come. People will fight for their own countries. But there may be a compromise at some stage for the development of the world.
Sir, we have come to the end of the session. You have touched almost all aspects of the world. You have covered almost all continents, so to say. You have given your own projections and trends. Wonderful analysis you have made, like the 3 or 4 trends that you have given. And you have also talked about the opportunities that waits for a country like India, even as it is struggling to cope up with its own internal economic issues. And also for Kerala, we have benefited a lot from this 1 hour in which you have shared very valuable insights as far as the global geopolitical context is concerned as to where we stand. Sir, there are many more unanswered questions. I could not pick up all the questions, but I'm thanking all the participants on behalf of the ASAP for asking those important questions. And sir, thank you so much for sparing your valuable time and for giving all the insights. And as you rightly mentioned, we are only midway through the crisis. We still don't know what are the emerging contours of the new world will be. So we'll again think about hosting a similar discussion, maybe 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. So we'll be happy to have you here. And at that time, maybe you'll be having different things to say, going with the kind of situation at that point of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. It is an opportunity. As you know, I'm kind of an evangelist for foreign affairs. So whenever I have any opportunity, I try to share my experience with anyone who cares to listen. And therefore, I'll be quite happy to participate. But in 2 or 3 weeks, we may not be able to reach a conclusion. It may be longer. It's always useful to compare notes and see where we are going. So thank you for this opportunity. As you know, I have very strong links with the higher education department. And I'm glad to see that ASAP is doing well in spite of several years. And wish you all the very best. You are doing very good work. I'm sure it will benefit our education system. Thank you very much indeed.
Sir, we are also thinking about making this platform a permanent one, like for meaningful discussions in issues of development as far as state is concerned. So we look forward to more contribution from your side and your participation in those discussions. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.